Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Paul Buckley. Welcome to the Mapei Academy. We're presenting today on the installation of the Mapestone system. So it's a heavy-duty paving system, but of course it can be utilised in any sort of paving. It doesn't have to be vehicle or anything like that. So the Mapestone system is used to install blocks, bricks, stone, cobbles, essentially for road surfaces. You'll see that as we go through the presentation that we talk about the MPA, or the strength of the actual product or the systems within the product. Hence why it's good for road surfaces, so like speed humps, car parks. We've done crossovers in the middle of freeways or highways. So it is essentially for that, but it can certainly be utilised into a standard pathway or driveway or whatever type of installation where you're using the traditional sand and cement installation methods for stones. So just a couple of examples. It's not just reserved for cobbles. It's as I said, we can use it for brick. We can use it for the larger format stone for footpaths and so on. We can use it for the pebbles. Cobbles is a big thing, and we'll talk about, well, the reason why we'll talk about cobbles is because they're a lot harder to deal with when it comes to grouting. So one of the products today we're going to go through is the actual grouting. So we'll get to that. So you can see we use it for laying sandstone, bluestone, any sort of streetscaping. That's not a problem. So the installations are, as I say, they're primarily, if this type of strength in a system is primarily for the heavy vehicle or high vehicle traffic loads, dealing with varying widths and depths of stones and block. So when we've got variation within cobbles, for instance, so some ranging between 100 mil and 70 mil or 40 mil and 50 mil and so on. And then the wide and often irregular joints is the grouting system that we'll talk about. So the Mapestone system must be laid over an engineered substrate if we are going to put it into a heavy trafficked area. So we have to have an area that's going to be free of deflection. So it's a good idea to be involved with an engineer. Most road projects that we are dealing with, an engineer is involved, and they will specify the sub base. So in a domestic area, a driveway or footpaths, and even in public footpaths, a lot of the times it's laid on a crushed road base or a crushed rock base. So it can be put into that type of application as well. But for the heavy vehicle areas, we need a non-deflecting substrate. So the first product in the system, there's only two products. There's the Mapestone TFB 60, which is the bedding. This actually transmits the load to the substrate. So I'll show you the MPA strength, but it's a very high MPA. You can see in that little video on the right there that when you're laying cobbles, we don't need to have any form of slurry, and it's a relatively fluffy mix so that we can beat the cobbles down without sorting as such. So if you have got 10, 20, 30 mil variation, we don't have to sort them out. We can actually compact it down into the TFB. We'll go through a few installation methods as we go on. The second product that we'll be talking about today is the grout. So it's the Mapestone PES 2 Visco. So this fills the joints, of course, but again, it's got a very high MPA, so 55 MPA. It acts as a locking mechanism or a locking part of the system. So it actually stops the rock and roll of the cobbles, and also in the larger format as well, which we'll go through a bit later. So why not just use a standard sand and cement screed, the traditional methods? And it's basically because they just don't have the strength that's required for a heavy vehicle trafficked area. So again, in your domestic situations, it's not so drastic, but when we're into the public areas, then we would always step up into these high strength mortars and high strength lock-in grout systems. The public spaces, they can be, you can be up for liability. So this should be considered so that you can create trip hazards or stopping hazards when you are using the traditional method. Basically what happens is over time you get compaction or just a breakdown of a traditional sand and cement screed, where we don't get that taking place with the high-end bedding products. So this is just an example, a graph of just showing you the difference in the MPA of a traditional sand and cement mix. So you can see there the sand and cement, most of the time they might get a little bit higher than that depending on the way they're blended and the way that they're compacted. But in a lot of cases they range between 10 and 15 MPA. With the Mapestone system, the bedding itself, the TFB 60, it's called 60 because it gets to 60 MPA. But you can see already after 1 day, we're already at 25 MPA. 7 days is 45 MPA, and then 28 days we're at 60. Likewise with the Visco, the grout, in 1 day we're already at 15 MPA, 45, and then up to 55 after 28 days. So you can see there's a massive difference in both the strength of the lock-in of the grout, but more importantly, the actual load bearing of the base. So the strength not only handles the traffic, it gives higher freeze thaw resistance. It reduces the moisture and salt penetration, and it provides a buffer for the less than ideal technique. So in other words, it takes a little bit of that idiot factor out of the equation, because it is such a strong bedding. And then again with the Visco, it locks everything into place. So even if a relatively newcomer does the job, which we would hope not in a road scenario, but in a domestic situation, the products can actually assist in overcoming some of the inadequacies of the installer. So rules and regulations can vary between states and councils, so you really do need to consult. Always, our understanding with these projects is they always come with a form of some form of engineering background, so there is specialists involved. Mapei do have in-house engineers and material specialists, and we can assist you with the submissions of your documentation. But certainly make sure an engineer is involved if it is a heavy vehicle area. So the installation process, it does vary, but we need to ensure the substrate has sufficient strength, as I said before. We can't allow the deflection to be, or the substrate to be bouncing up and down if we are involving trucks and cars and so on. So if in doubt, have an engineer assess the substrate. So we're only as strong as the weakest link. So make sure the surface is free from contaminants. So no dust. We're only as strong as what we're bonding to. So if we're sticking to a layer of dust, that's what that's the weak link in our bond. Latent, so anything coming to the surface in the concrete substrate. Grease and oil. Release agents. A simple way to work out with release agents is to dribble a little bit of water on there. If it does bleed, if it does bubble, I should say, then without doubt, you've probably got something on the surface. And in a lot of cases, the curing and sealing compounds, these do need to be mechanically removed in 99.9% of the cases. So a light grind, a light sand, but they definitely need to have this mechanical works done to it to open up the surface of the substrate to give it some absorption that we can get a very good bond to. Plan the position of expansion joints. So recommended where something meets something, basically. So if curves meeting pavements, manholes, drains, changing direction, changing slopes, anywhere where there's runoff through troughs, then think about it. Again, if you're unsure, we recommend that you speak to the engineer involved in the project, or follow the Australian standards. The sealing of the expansion joints, we recommend the Mapeflex PU45. It's a high modulus and highly durable polyurethane sealant. So it works in pretty much all cases, and it's a readily available product. Mapestone system is typically laid as a bonded system, meaning that it must be laid into a bonding slurry. Now, we quite often find in the landscaping fraternity that a lot of the slurries that the guys are using in the traditional scenarios, we often find that they're way too watery, so not enough integrity in the actual bonding slurry itself. We use the word yogurt-like consistency or toothpaste-like consistency, but it must have a bit of body into it so that it can basically be put down with a notch trowel. Obviously, people will broom it, brush it in, but it just needs to have some integrity about it to actually create that bond. So we don't want it being drawn into the substrate or drawn back up into the bedding before it's actually had a chance to do what it's meant to do. And of course, lay into it whilst it's still wet. So we always go wet on wet. So the TFB 60 has optimized aggregate already. So it's already pre-blended, it's factory blended. We get the perfect amount of sand and cement ratio every single time. So you literally just have to add water. Always have a look at the back of the bag or get the technical data sheet to work out the water ratios. It is important. These things are developed in a lab to actually work to a set ratio. So it's always good to check your water ratio. The work in stages. So don't let the product go off. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to compact it properly. Two, you're just not going to be able to create the bond. So again, it's the wet into wet scenario. Set the joint widths between 5 and 15 mil nominally. I know that does vary and change a bit. Ensure the grout joint depth is at least 25 millimeters to enable that lock-in effect. So we can do shallower joints, of course, but you're not going to get that actual lock-in effect. And if we were doing a shallower joint, then we would more than likely switch over to a bonded methodology of putting the stone in, which I'll show you in a minute. So the larger stones and blocks have proportionally less lock-in effect. So exactly what I was just saying. So we don't, you might be laying a 20 mil stone, and by the time you get some of the mud up into the joints, you might be left with a 15, even a 10 mil grout joint depth. So that lock-in effect is, it's just not as strong as what it should be. So it's always important that when we get into the larger format stone, that we use the bonding slurry to maximize the bond. So this is just a picture of showing the slurry going on top of the TFB. So there would have been the slurry underneath, then the bedding, and then the slurry to go back on top. So this, as I say, maximizes the bonding. So we don't have to rely so much on the grout as being the integral part of the system. Whilst the Mapestone is still fresh, you can vibrate, compact the area to maximize the strength. So what that does is basically compacts the bed, and of course it flattens off the surface of the stone. So especially in the public areas, we need to have as little tripping hazards as possible, even though it's very difficult to do with the shape or the face of the cobble. So vibrate, compact the area to lock, and then lock the stone in, and then it's ready for the grouting to take place. So installing the Visco, the best way to give the strongest monolithic bond is to actually, again, use the wet into wet situation. So we would we would push the grout into the joints whilst we're actually in the laying process. It does a couple of different things, but it makes everything basically dry as one. So again, the Visco pre-mixed, we've done all the work for you in the blending processes. So all you really need to do, all you have to do, is add the right amount of water. And then the pot life for the grout is 40 minutes. So wet down the surface of the stone before pouring in the Mapestone, the Visco. This makes the clean off air easier and helps the grout to slide into the joints. So if we didn't do this, we get the porosity of the stone. The Visco actually sticks to the stone. So one, you get a much harder process when it comes to cleaning off. You get just a messier product, but you also can get the snap drying of the grout as well. So we don't want to have it snap dry because it does weaken the product. So we pour the Mapestone into the joints, and then we use a squeegee to drag it across and drop it down into all the joints. And I'll show you this quick video. You can see it's a very fluid mix, and with the wet surface, it slides across the surface of the stone very easily. And you can see that with that wet surface, we actually take off as much of the residue as possible. So if that was dry, as I said, it dries onto the surface of the cobble or the stone, and it actually makes this process a lot harder. So you leave a lot more residue on top of the stone that's going to hinder your cleaning process. The cleaning process of the Mapestone is quite unique. It's done with a hose, or it can be done in the traditional method, of course, with a sponge. But anyone who's laid cobbles will understand that the cobble surface is very hard to sponge off. It'd be every few meters you'd be throwing away your sponge. So this is a very unique aspect of this particular product. It's in its plastic state. It actually stays in shape, so we can actually hose it off. So we would never do this with a traditional grout, but with this type of grout, it's not a problem. So I'll show you the way it's done. So you can see the hose at the very low angle, and it's just taking the grout off the surface, and then he scoops the residue back into where you're actually going to lay your next thing. So as I say, it's good to do it in the one motion. So what they've got here now is they've basically got finish meters for one, but they've got that strong monolithic bond of the lock-in effect of the grout locking into the base and cleaned off much more easily. And the residue of the grout gets cleaned into the area where you're about to work. So the problem with coming along later and doing everything later on is that all that wash off is going to end up down the drain and become an environmental incident. So it's a good idea to, as I say, do it as you go. So if they've been vibrated in, there's no problems about walking on the cobbles because they're already compacted down into where they want to be. If you are into the larger format stone, then you would walk in the middle, of course. You don't walk on the edge of it where it's going to flip up and break the bond. So, it's just be careful the way that you walk on it, but it's a good idea to do it all in one. And as I say, in an economic sense, you've got finish meters at the end of the day. So it comes in a mid-grey colour. That's wet, but we do have it in two different colours, but we've basically focused on the mid-grey. It seems to be what everyone wants, so it's just a cement grey. It's a very good, cheap grout as well. So not only does it have the strength, it also has the price. So the Mapestone system is set to light foot traffic 12 to 24 hours and 7 days for the vehicles. So as we went through before with that graph, 15 MPA after 1 day, 45 after 7, and then 28 days it's at its maximum, the 55 for the grout and the 60 for the base. It can also be used for grouting non-vehicle applications, as I said. So we can use it in the traditional sense in normal landscaping practices. So it's a much higher strength grout than any site blended sand and cement. And it's a higher strength than actually our traditional grouts as well. So it's comparable in cost to our Caracolor GG, but it's preferable to use the Mapestone Visco for the stone applications. I think it looks a lot better. It gives that more rustic kind of finish, not the smooth finish of a traditional tile grout. So, and it's much more free flowing, and the clean off process, as we saw, it's a very easy clean off. When you are doing the large format, as I say, there's no issues with using the traditional sponge method to do the cleaning process. You can visit our academy, and for the recordings of this type of webinar, we also have quite a few other webinars on our academy. We've got anything from vinyl, luxury vinyl planks. We've got on some of our building line products, some of the strengthening products, some of our anchoring for building line. We've got some tiling webinars on there, so you're selecting and using glues and how to use a grout correctly. So there's lots to see in that Mapei Academy. Thanks you very much for your time today. I will be hanging around for any questions, and I'll bring that up and see if there is any questions. But yeah, if you have got any jobs where you think you need our assistance, then by all means get in touch with us at Mapei. We're in every state, of course, and we can assist you on any type of application, be it a domestic backyard, driveway, be it a heavy vehicle roadway. Get in touch with Mapei whenever you need us. Thanks for your time today. I hope you got something out of it, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you. Okay, I can see there's no questions, which is a good thing. Hopefully we covered all the bases. So thank you again, and again, we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.